surprised he was running for senator, but pleased when he won. And so today, I think this is going to be a treat for us because I want, too often people avoid politics, they don't go to political functions, blah, 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 blah. I wanted Ben to put some flesh and blood on what it is to be in our state capitol, what it was like in his first session, some of the behind the scenes things, and a few things that might have been surprising that they didn't warn him about or you didn't anticipate. And then if he wishes, legislation that might be coming our way, what he's working on, but what might be coming our way that we need to know about, and how we can help him succeed. You can't just send him up there by himself, okay, or down there by himself. We need to support him. So I can clearly testify today that if there's a senator representing us that's worth supporting, it's Ben. So let's welcome Ben.
So thank you for the introduction. I've loved Nels since I first met him. I think we share a heart for a lot of different things, certainly for business. My background is actually in business for many years. I owned and operated a manufacturing company here in town, and we developed and manufactured construction tools. And we sold that company in 2019, and that kind of opened the door for me to get involved in the political realm. Before that, I actually served on the Small Business Development Center Advisory Council, which is a service of the state of Idaho to help businesses, coach businesses, and we found it very helpful, and so I was able to serve in that way, helping other businesses. Then I've coached businesses over the years, so I'm like-minded with you, and probably have gone through some of the pains and successes that you experience as a small business owner. As far as my role in the Senate, first of all, I really think it's more important for me to answer questions to you, for me to hear from you. I think that that's something lost with politicians. You often hear a lot from politicians, and I think politicians often listen too little. So I want to leave a fair amount of time to answer questions that you might have for me. So I'm going to try to split this up in 20 to 30 minutes of talking with you, and then getting questions and giving you guys some feedback. The whole process of how legislation becomes law, how many people feel like they're extremely familiar with how legislation becomes law? All right, so we have two, but the reality is I wasn't, even just a few years ago, I wasn't either. So I think it's useful to go back and kind of cover the bases. I can probably do that in like 5 minutes, but then it makes everything else we talk about more useful because you can understand kind of how the process works. So my role in the Senate at the organization session after I was elected to office, I went down to Boise and we went through a process where, mostly based on seniority, you were able to choose which committees you wanted to be a part of. And I knocked on a lot of doors in our community, and what I heard consistently was people having concerns about our education system. So I ended up choosing to be on the education committee, and ultimately I was offered the vice chair position on that committee. So it gives me a fair amount of influence in an area that's really important to myself and to our community. So that was a real honor. I chose the transportation committee because I believe that transportation is one of the legitimate roles of government. Like, I think most everybody's on board with having good roads and bridges. And so it felt like it's actually a much lighter lift than the education, which education constitutes over half of the revenue in our state goes towards education. So It's a pretty major part of our state government. Transportation is still important, a smaller percentage. And then I also was given the opportunity to be on state affairs. How many know what state affairs committee what it has to do with? The obvious answer is state affairs that deal with the state. So it covers the broader things, like broader issues, like it would deal with abortion, it would deal with firearms, it would deal with alcohol, how that's managed in our state. So some of the broader social issues go through that committee. I was honored to be invited to be on that committee, probably one of the first freshmen ever to be on that committee. So being able to be a voice on there for our community was really exciting to me. Otherwise I would have chose JFAC because I love finances and that's the finance committee. But they gave me the choice between the two and they offered me to be on the State Affairs Committee, which is more of a leadership committee. So that kind of gives you what I personally, where I dove deep down at the state level. So you can kind of see, I'm not going to be able to talk to you as much as I'd like to about what happened in human resources and commerce, which might be more relevant to you, but I didn't hear all those bills and I didn't go as deep in that area. Let's see, so how does a bill become law? So the life of a bill, it starts with a draft. A draft is like a rough idea of what the bill might be, and it gets refined. Usually you get a lot of feedback from different people, and you refine it until the point where you think it's good enough to actually publish for the public to see. And when you publish it, or when you bring it out into the public, it's called a routing slip, and it's introduced through a committee as a potential law. So that's how it gets into the public domain. Before that, it's private. It's actually private information that people aren't privy to. After it's been giving a routing slip, then it gets a hearing, and I'll talk about possibly gets a hearing, but it goes through a hearing process where there's public testimony, people find out more of the pros and cons of the bill, there's some debate, at least discussion by the committee, and there's input from constituents across the state and lobbyists. And then there's a vote, and then the hearing goes to the floor of whichever chamber it started from. So if it started in the Senate, it would go to the Senate floor. If it started in the House committee, it would go to the House floor. And then it kind of goes through the same process on the opposite side. So this is what I was told, and gives you an idea of how tough it is to get a bill to become law. After that process, in that process, you have to get, if it starts in the Senate, you have to get 5 committee members usually to vote for it to get out of the committee. Then you have to get 18 senators to vote for it to get it out of the floor. And then you have to get approximately 9 representatives to vote for it to get it out of their committee. Then you have to get 36 minimum representatives to vote for it to get it out of the House. And then you have to get 1 governor to sign it for it to become law. So it's, I was told this, it's 5, 18, 9, 36, 1. That's what it takes to get a bill to become law. A great example of that is the property tax bill, which the bill is House Bill 292A. It ran through that entire process. It was very popular in both the House and the Senate, and it would have given property tax relief to the citizens of Idaho, which is a major issue that I think everyone agrees is something that needs to be addressed. So, but when it made it to the governor actually vetoed it. So it made it through all those numbers, and then 1 stopped it. So we can override the veto, and we did with a 2/3 majority. We overrode the veto for the first time in maybe 15 to 20 years. So it's very rare that a veto gets overridden. But it was overridden along party lines in both the House and the Senate, and so that became law. So as far as the legislative session goes, it's really long days. I mean, really long days. You start early. I have thousands of emails, lots of bills to read. You go from committee hearings to the floor sessions, back to committee hearings, and it's pretty much just that over and over again every day. Really long days. It was, I came home a lot of times on the weekends. It was really nice to get back to my wife and kids. And it kind of takes its toll on you. It feels like one day, it feels like a week. So I'd call my wife at night and she'd be like, what happened today? And I'm like, can't even remember the beginning of the day because so many things have happened in one little short period of time. And so it was pretty intense. Nels asked me to go over some surprises. I actually campaigned on how lobbyists have too much influence in our state. And so the surprise was that they have more influence than I even thought they had once I got down there. And what really made me realize that was I went to a chair to ask for a bill that I knew my constituents would want passed to have a hearing or to be introduced, and the chair said you needed to go talk with this lobbyist, this lobbyist, this lobbyist, and this lobbyist before I will consider introducing the bill. That gives lobbyists a lot of power if you have chairs that are doing that. So I had to run it by the lobbyist first. As a representative of my constituents, I had to still run it by the lobbyists. So that's I believe that's a serious issue. Now, sometimes lobbyists are super helpful and they're on the same page with you, but the fact that you have to run it past them is what I have a problem with. I think that they represent an interest. They can certainly make their case in front of the hearing, but should they be there to actually decide whether it gets a hearing? And I'd say no. A great example of a lobbyist-oriented bill was the launch bill. Are any of you familiar with the launch bill? So the launch bill would give, I think it was originally $8,500, but it ended up being $8,000 to every high school graduate to use for college education. Now, sounds really good on the surface until you think about it being other people's money, right? OPM, other people's money, very addictive. The government gets addicted to it and uses it a lot. So the money has to come from somewhere. The legislation was supported by a lobbying group that's the most powerful called IACI, which is the Idaho Associations of Commerce and Industry. Well, I'm pro-business. I'm guessing you all are pro-business. But what I'm not pro is big business using the government to fund its training programs, and that's essentially what this legislation was, in my opinion. It was actually set up where it wouldn't give every high schooler the money to use anywhere they want it. They had to use it on specific in-need industry or in-need jobs. So the in-need jobs were chosen by a panel that included probably some lobbyists or some industry leaders, and they got to choose what the young people were allowed to use the money on. So I have a problem with that. I also have a problem with giving people anything that they don't earn. And it seems like as soon as we're adults, we don't want the first experience of somebody as an adult to be getting a handout. It doesn't make sense to me. My daughter, and I actually shared this on the floor in the Senate when we were debating this bill. My daughter, who's 15 years old, has somewhere a little over $6,000 now saved in her account from working at Bear Paw Cookies on Sherman. She'll probably use that for college or a down payment on her house. If my 15-year-old daughter can save some money, I'm sure that these high school graduates have the opportunity to save some money and pay their way. What happens when you pay for something? You value it. Whatever we sacrifice for, we value. And so a big problem to me is I see people getting their way paid, and then they don't value it the way they should. Maybe they get a degree that they're not going to use, which I don't know what percentage of time that happens, but it's very high how often people don't use their degree. So they'll end up with student loan debt. And it's not that much different than all this Republican outcry of President Biden doing this loan forgiveness of $10,000, I think it was. So what's the difference, you tell me, between giving high schoolers $8,000, which is what the launch bill did, or for giving a loan of $10,000? The difference, philosophically, about $2,000 is the difference. So there's not a significant difference in my mind. You're just giving them it up front instead of paying off their loans. That's an example of a lobbyist supported bill, and it actually made it through and got signed into law, but not without a few people standing up against it, like myself. So some other surprises: the Senate leadership, which is the pro tem, the majority leader, the assistant majority leader, and the caucus chair. Those four are they're considered the leaders of the Senate. I had heard horror stories about them being very coercive and trying to make you vote a certain way. Had none of that experience at all. They were completely supportive of it. It may be because I pushed back when a chair tried to coerce me, and I said, hey, you can put me on any committee you want. If I can't vote for my constituents the way my constituents want, then it doesn't matter what committee I'm on. So I'm like, you can take my vice chairmanship away. It doesn't matter to me, because if I can't vote the way I should, I believe I need to anyway, then it doesn't matter what committee I'm on. So I kind of sent the message early on, but I never saw them pushing people to vote a certain way. They would debate like everyone else, but they never like threatened me or anything like that. So that's a good surprise, right? Another surprise, chairs have way too much control. And because they can draw a bill. So if I was to go back to those numbers, we have the one that's the governor, where he can veto at the end. Unfortunately, because of the way that the Senate's set up, before that, let's see, I started out with 5 senators in a committee have to vote. You actually have to get one chair to even have a hearing. So that one chair can veto it before it ever even makes it to the other ones to vote for. And then you do have the 18 senators, and then you have one chair in the House that can veto it. That's a major problem. I had a bill that passed along party lines through the Senate Education Committee. Then it made it to the Senate floor. It passed along party lines on the Senate floor with a veto-proof majority. So this is like the will of the people. The people are for it, or the representatives of the people. And then it got drawered in the House Education Committee. So one person who is not the governor vetoed that, is the way I look at it. But there's no chance for a veto override even. So you can see how problematic that is. That particular piece of legislation was, I think, as broadly appealing as you could get. It was no sexualization, no sexual material for children under the 5th grade. Controversial?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, how can this be controversial? And yet it died in a House drawer. So that's my example of how of a surprise I had with the chairs. The problem, I know the problem, which means I know how to fix it. The problem is Rule 20H. Doesn't mean much to you, but if you look in the Senate rules, Rule 20H says that any chair of a committee can make their decision is final, and it can't be appealed to the committee or to the body on the floor. It's really, really messed up. And so I would love to, I'll be looking for ways to try to change that rule. And what some of the ways you could change is you could have the committee be able to overrule the chair by a 2/3 majority, maybe set a high bar, whatever. It's just, it's really problematic for a chair to be able to have that discretion. And chairs have used it to actually overrule the will of the committee members. Because with a voice vote, they get to decide what happened in the vote. So all in favor, say aye. One person says aye. All opposed, say nay. 8 people say nay. The ayes have it.
Wow.
I'm serious. They could just say the ayes have it. Not appealable. So anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox on chairs, but that is an issue in the Senate. Another problem, maybe it was, I put it under surprises, but maybe it wasn't a surprise. not all Republicans vote like Republicans, but all Democrats vote like Democrats. And some Republicans definitely vote like Democrats. So, and when I say that, I'm referring to how people voted compared to each other, so it's just factual. Like, this person joined the Democrats and killed the legislation. And I'm saying that in reference to the party platform. So when I say they don't vote like a Republican, it means that they voted against their own party platform that they said they supported, or that the R means they support. So let's see, a lot of debate is done behind the scenes in the majority caucus. So a lot of what happens you don't even see, and I think that more of that should be made public, but a lot of decisions are made behind the scenes. And the nasty attacks are a reality. I get up almost every day to a phone call calling me the worst person in the world and telling me I should kill myself or whatever. And that's just a part of the burden you bear. I put up cameras at my house before I left. I wanted to be able to monitor what was going on. We have a good-sized dog. But it's a reality that the side, I'd say the side that says they're civil and that we should love each other or whatever, be kind, that some of them can be the most horrible if they don't like the way that you're voting.
You like throwing buckets of water on people?
Yes, exactly. A lot of nasty attacks and intimidation. I'll go through really quickly through some successes I sponsored that I had. I was really surprised to have as much success as I had because, like I said, you have to get through all those numbers and then signed by the governor to get it into law. And so I actually had 7 bills that I was able to get passed into law, which was a huge accomplishment for a freshman and was surprising to me, but I was able to build some good relationships early on. Yeah, it's totally God. You're right, it's totally God. But what God empowers us to do is to build relationships with other people and to be winsome and kind and work well with people, and you can convince people that way a lot better than by being nasty, turns out. So the Parents' Rights Bill was a huge expansion of parents' rights for what rights parents have in law at their schools, at the public schools. And so that was huge. It did everything from there's a lot of surveys that go around, and they ask some questions that are really invasive. Parents have to sign off that their children can take those surveys. For counseling or major mental changes in the young people, parents have to sign off, or they have to notify the parents. So the list, I think there was probably 7 main points. I won't go through all of them, but there was some major forward progress in making sure that parents are informed and involved in their children's education. The next one, which had I've gotten the most feedback about, was open enrollment. The governor said at the beginning of the session, he said in his State of the State address, he said we have open enrollment and our students can go to whatever school they want to in the state of Idaho. And so I was talking to some people afterwards, and we were like, what if we ran a bill that made what the governor said the reality? It'll be hard for him not to sign it into law. So we ran a bill, and I don't believe he did that necessarily not knowing that it wasn't completely the case, but we wanted to make it so that students really could in every situation. And so we passed that open enrollment bill, so students can go into different schools, whichever one they choose, and even across district lines. And before it was just within the district. So I got this email, must have been about a week ago or a week and a half ago, and this parent's like, my 6-year-old and my 8-year-old, I believe those are ages, have to travel for 3 hours on a bus to get to the school in their district. We're 300 yards away from the other district, and their elementary school that we want them to go to is only 10 minutes away. But we've appealed and we've asked if we could go to the one that's 10 minutes away, and they've said no, and they make our kids travel 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week. Imagine a 6-year-old on a bus, 15 hours a week. And so I immediately called them, probably 5 minutes after I got the email. I'm like, we passed a law that fixes this. It's effective July. And I mean, she was like, that is so cool. She's like, I'm gonna tell all my neighbors because they're in the same situation. So when you see a law that you helped sponsor come to fruition, and then it actually impacts people's lives, it's really, really rewarding. I sponsored a bill that stops cities from becoming sanctuary cities from state felony law. And if cities start to do that, we will withhold the state sales tax that they get a portion of. So it has some teeth. We probably won't have cities that are going against our law. And we've seen other states that have cities that do that and how messed up that can get. Let's see. The work to do. I had other bills, but those are just the 3 that I thought would be useful to highlight. Work to do, education savings accounts. I'm a big belief in education savings accounts. If you've read the paper and you've heard that they're an existential threat to public education, it's not true. They're really not. That's what the paper says, but it's not true. What they do is they give true choice to parents. Parents can choose what is best for their children, how they should be educated, where they should be educated. And I think that's probably the most important piece of legislation that failed, that I would like to see us work on next session. I know we will be. And just to go a little bit more into ESAs, it's a market-based approach. So as a business person, I really appreciate it. Competition makes things better. So when you have competition, it actually will make the public schools better. I'm actually a supporter of the public schools. I'm not against them. My mother was a school teacher. My grandmother was a school teacher. I think there's wonderful school teachers in Idaho. I think there's some that aren't so great too, and I can tell you stories about them. But and we need to deal with them. But guess what? The market-based approach will deal with that. Because if parents are able to vote with their dollars, and that's what an education savings account does, an education savings account would mean my child's going to this school, they're teaching things that I don't agree with, or it's an unhealthy situation, or they're not satisfying the education needs of my student. I pull them out of that school. The money follows the student. The school starts to pay attention. The school gets better, right? See how the public schools will get better as a result of competition and people being able to make those decisions, parents being able to make those decisions. I have other, most of my other bills, I already talked about the no sexualization for kids under 5th grade that got drawered. I also had a bill that wouldn't allow minors at sexual performances. And that one actually made it through, I think it made it through the House with a veto-proof majority and then got drawered in the Senate. So it got drawered on the opposite side. For the vast majority of people, these are not controversial issues. I know there is a minority that's very vocal and they try to frame it as hate, but it's not. It's not. These are children, and we're just saying that they shouldn't be present at putting money into G-strings or whatever the craziness is that we see in our society. And I also didn't target any one group. I was, in that bill, I was like, I don't care if you're homosexual, heterosexual, there's no sexual performances in front of minors. That should just be a standard in our community. All right, so I'm open to questions. Hopefully I didn't, it's 12:30 exactly. Is that how long I was supposed to go? See, politicians do talk a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
So, you're on the transportation committee.
Yes.
One of the concerns is that when federal dollars come down here and we put those to work, they come with a lot of strings attached.
Yep.
We're seeing very visible evidence of that already showing up in our community, and you can go to any street corner and find a surveillance camera. Now, the surveillance camera will be told to you as the retail version is, this helps sequence when the light turns green, it's very convenient, it's there for your use. But it's a precursor and a foundational element of 15-minute cities. And we can say, well, that's tinfoil hat talk because 15-minute cities aren't really real and nobody's talking about it, except for the fact that we've got 7 license plate readers that are now coming to Coeur d'Alene. That's not to turn the light green on the right time or the right thing. So when and how is the Transportation Committee going to get energized and activated on protecting our constitutional rights and not having us go to a Chinese surveillance state here in North America?
I'd be happy to run a bill to deal with that. I mean, I think that it's technology of all kinds is a double-edged sword. Your phone that you have in your pocket, you make the choice of at least. It's tracking you, it knows where you're at. So all technology is a double-edged sword. It can be used for good and it can be used for evil. So we've got to figure out how to limit it, especially in the public sphere, how it could be used for
possible
evil.
reason could a camera on top of a traffic light serve?
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you. I think that the obvious reasons that they have that they state has to do with the traffic flow and all of that, and I get that.
What would you start to introduce a bill like that?
What was that?
What would a person start if they wanted to?
That's a great question. So, our
Repeat the question for the group.
yeah. So how would you get started on a bill? How would you get rolling a bill that would deal with that? So that is something I meant to mention and was really eye-opening to me was how engaged all of us can be in this whole process. Literally, if you were to say, Ben, this is a really important issue to me, I can sign a slip and give it to the Legislative Services Office. They'll work directly with you to create a bill that deals with the issue that you're talking about. And then that bill, then we work to find the best sponsors for that bill. It may be me. I had bills that came from other legislators that they had citizens working on, and I was the best person to sponsor it. So I would sponsor that bill and take it through the process. And other times you'll sponsor the bills that you helped connect the people with Legislative Services Office. So we could work directly on that together. Yeah.
So I know that this is probably controversial for probably a lot of people in this room, but my question kind of revolves around levies, you know, so Fort Wayne School District has not grown into appearance, you know, like we all know facts around it, or
Yep.
so maybe some people don't.
Yeah.
You know, but with this $25 million levy now being the biggest levy in the state, you know, like what is your guys' like, or I guess even your own, you know, like, it's like, so we voted no so many times and now it's yes, but we can't come back and say we voted no to vote because we won 3 times, you know?
Right.
And so when is there a cap on levies? Like how long, you know, I don't have kids in the public school system, we homeschool our kids, so how long do I have to pay for everybody else's kids to have education? It doesn't equal, you know, it actually, you know, they say, oh, Berlin has, you know, a very great school district, we all know that's not true. You know, like they come out of that school with a 23% college readiness level.
Right.
You know, so that does not equal a good school to me. And so, you know, I label this person as, oh, you don't support our community, you don't support kids, you know, whatever. Really, it's like I don't see any difference in where my money has gone for all of the taxes that I pay into, you know, because not only is it the levy, but my taxes are also funding the public school district. So, you know, like what's
Let me ask, did they win yesterday?
yeah, they did.
So I have a solution, and I was gonna bring this up, a partial solution. I noted that on the school and NIC, that certain large public organizations held rallies with one side. And I think it's time for a private business to step up to the plate. I would never do that. But I think as these issues come up, we will provide a forum for the public, and we'll have the best fighter from this side and the best fighter from that side. Let the public hear both sides, not just one side. And I think that can be good for hard business. We'll probably put it under our Choose Local label. But because I personally will not state publicly my political views because I'm trying to unite. And so the only way that I can do something like this, and I want to because I'm just burning over this, is to present both sides, which reflects what on us, and lets people know about us, but it's a public service. And that was something I wanted to talk to Ben about as a way that we can help it.
Yeah, I had multiple people reach out to me and they were like, what's going on with the school levy? What's going on with education funding in our state? And so I'd meet with one-on-one with people and like, I can lay out both sides. I've coached debate for years, so I actually kind of enjoy looking at both sides. And I think there's people in our community that it makes sense that they're voting for it, and I think there's people that it makes sense they're voting against it. I don't have a problem with people voting different ways. I just think they need good information and they need to make good decisions. And I agree that it's too often, far too often, that we have to vote for the same thing over and over again, or something very similar. So as a result, the Senate actually, or the legislature actually, the bill that got vetoed, the property tax bill that got vetoed, actually had in it to remove the March date for the levy. So we're going from 4 to 3. So we're moving in the right direction. But yeah, I think that we know that that's an issue, that people are tired of voting for the same thing or similar things over and over. And it's kind of like your kid coming to you and they like ask you for something, you're like, no, and then they come back and ask for it another way. It's like,
So how
I
did
said
that
no.
even, like, so the school is the only thing that can keep asking. So how did we even get to the point where they can ask 3 or 4 times? And where is that even in law or legislation? Like, who even presented that?
So whether or not they're the only one that can ask, I'm not positive. I'd have to look into it, but it might be just with dealing with levies, yeah.
So is it against the law in this state for somebody in a public office or inside a public institution that's funded by state dollars to solicit funds or drive you to vote a certain way on a topic?
In their public capacity, certainly,
Okay.
yeah. And that has to be, you have to
So
document
if
it
somebody's
and
on a
take it.
school board or if you're a teacher of that school, if you're sending out an email or contacting people on behalf of that would then be a violation of state law. If they violated that law, then where's the repercussion?
In my understanding correctly, you'd have to take it to the county clerk or to the Secretary of State, depending on who's governing that election. But you have to, anything you see, you have to document, and then you have to, and then what I don't know the law well enough to know exactly what the results are, the ramifications for them are.
Okay, so I guess it wasn't clear. So so I want to compare Ada County, which is 4 times bigger than Portland. Okay, they got 4 times as many students, they've got over 4 times as many buildings, and they have 4,000 employees. Okay, so Portland School District has 1/4 of all those things except for employees, 2,000 employees at Portland School District at a 1/4 capacity, right?
Yeah.
And Ada's levy for 2022 was $14 million a year, okay? And Portland School District at that time was $20 million. So that's, I guess, how are we gonna stop that to where Portland School District can no longer take, advantage of our community? To where it's like, well, we need all of this stuff because we've got, all this great stuff that nobody else has that everybody else does have. And yet, our kids can't have sports, they can't have this, but every other, school in Idaho does without a $25 million levy. So that's my question, is how are we gonna stop that? Because I'm really passionate about this. I don't want this, especially if it's gonna come into something that's in perpetuity. I don't want this, we've lived in Idaho our whole entire lives. We were born and raised here. I hope that my kids wanna stay here, and I don't want them inheriting this tax that is paying for, especially even with the education dollars that were approved, to help fund schools this year. And that was totally ignored by everybody in the Portland School District. They wouldn't even acknowledge it. Hopper said that they can't use it for, what they need to use it for,
Yeah, I asked the question at the state level, I'm like, how much of this money that we approved is gonna go towards District 271? And I believe their answer was 5.2 million of it. So I'm like, why didn't they at least reduce the levy
Yes.
down by that amount? So the answer, really a lot of this has to do with informing people, because all of these things are things that people vote for. And so you can go from a top down and you could say, no more levies. There's a lot of things you could do, but do you really want to run against the will of the people? I think you want to inform the people and have them make a good decision. And it sounds like you're on top of that. It sounds like you should be one of the debaters between, if Nell sets it up. If Nell sets it up, you're presenting one side of it. Make sure that people get out and see it and then spread the word. And I think that there's a lack of knowledge about it and people believe lies, and that's how a lot of politicians get into office, unfortunately.
Yeah.
What was that?
They use our children.
Yeah, oh
And
totally,
you got kids
yeah.
going home crying.
The next battlefield or the next plane attack. So what happened yesterday is what happened. What this strategist would tell you is now put that into an opportunity. And the way that I would address the opportunity is, we see many more resources now are going to Coeur d'Alene School District than they've ever presided over before. So we people have decided that the current body of folks that oversee that process are no longer sufficient to preside over these resources. Therefore, we, the people in Mass, will come down, we will relieve you school board members of your roles because you're not competent to preside over this level of resources. We will demand a change at the superintendent position because you got what you wished for, you're going to have the resources, but they're not going to be adjudicated properly by this particular group of people. And so the new battlefield is, we will have to insist on what the curriculum is, we will have to insist on complete transparency with how these resources are meted out, and then competency in meeting out those resources is there. So congratulations, you ran a great campaign. Bad news is, you're the wrong ones to run this money.
And I think to go along with that, that's a great way of looking at it because it uses the election process to change things. Imagine changing the school board members or maybe the superintendent. Now you fast forward 2 years when would we have the same levy presented again? No, we wouldn't. Because they're going to be the ones who drive what levy we have, if any levy.
Right.
So I think that you're exactly right. And that's why I'm saying there is a top-down way to deal with stuff. We can go to the state level, but I think that dealing with it in our community is a healthier way to deal with it.
And that's been happening all
You
over
had,
the country.
you had a question?
I was
Sorry.
wondering how the levy is affected by the education savings account and how the education savings account compares to something like voucher systems.
Mhm. Yeah. So how would if we had an education savings account, how would that affect levies? If people exited the public schools in our area, there would be even less students for them to use to justify that they need those large amounts of money. So I think you could create competition there where healthy competition between education options. I don't know exactly how that would work with the levies. I don't know how that's worked. Arizona is the best example of a universal education savings account. I haven't studied into how that impacts levies in Arizona. That's probably where I'd naturally go. And your second question is, what's the difference between a voucher and an ESA? So a voucher is usually something the government gives you to use towards a private school, and it's limited based on that way of thinking. So an education savings account would allow you to use the money however you saw fit. And some of the beauty of a market-based system, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine has a child that needs speech therapy. And they went to the school system and they had like a federal grant to help them pay for the speech therapy. And they couldn't afford enough, that didn't pay for enough speech therapy because the school system charged so much for that. So they found a private tutor that was, I think, about a quarter of the cost. And they were able to get what they needed for their son. So when you have that competition, that's just a small example of what competition does. You end up with often higher quality and lower prices. But when you have an education monopoly, they're able to hold the prices high and the level of service isn't controlled the same way. Yeah, either one.
No, I was gonna go all the way to here. So it's like, is that okay?
Yeah.
So 2 questions. One is there a list of lobbyists that is that known? Like, where is a list of that? Is it on a website somewhere that you can go and look? Or
Other than
does there
that,
need to be a database created that?
if you want it, I have it's actually a book that they give us, and they call them legislative advisors. Here's your book and your directory of legislative advisors. So I could give you that book and you could see all the lobbyists.
Is there a digital copy of it, or is it all? So it sounds like there needs to be a digital copy.
There may be a digital copy. I could ask for a digital copy and send it around.
So then my other question then is looking at, are there open data policies? So I'm more on the technology side of things, and so I want to be able to see, are there ways to actually look at the data that's coming out, to look at data from voting? I know that's sort of there, but looking at other data points, how is the traffic doing? What library books do we have? What are we as the people paying for? And how do we get that data to be able to start analyzing that data? Because that's one of the things I think, even in the levy, right? Where is all that money going? How do we see where that money is being paid for? In every situation, there should be open data policies that.
This would be good because there was before the last vote, there was some really good stuff put out there with large sums of money that are unaccounted for. I mean, large sums, hundreds of thousands of dollars each, that they refuse to account for. They want to know where that money goes. If we did something like this,
Is that,
he's talking about, made it more public, not that the quarterly press would report it, but if we did this, that gives power to the people.
Yeah.
so is that something that is out there now, or is that going to need a state law to allow that to happen?
So, I mean, you're covering a lot of different areas, so some of it's out there for certain. There has been legislation that's like we need to have better transparency for school finances. Like you can look there, but everything's grouped under big categories and it's not really transparent.
Et cetera, supplies,
Yeah,
et
yeah.
cetera.
And so there was a bill that was put through that was to create district level transparency data, and I don't believe it passed. But we're aware that more data needs to be available to people. If you were to point out a few specific areas, I could figure out whether those areas are available, and I could connect you, or I could go to legislative services and draft a bill to make it available.
This, what he's talking about, then makes total sense what Wayne has said. You go in armed and say, this is,
Yep.
these are the facts.
You need more
Where did
information.
this come from?
Well, another weapon you've got at your fingertips, though, is every citizen has the right to go down, and you can do it electronically online and file a public, request for public records release. This is like in the federal government called FOIA. And what that means is that they actually have to go through the pain of hiring an attorney. They'll send it over to the city attorney and they'll adjudicate, what part of this do we have to release? Is this legal records request release? And if they get it from several citizens at the same time, guess what? You're just eating away at that mayor's budget. If they don't want to answer the mail on this, they can keep paying their attorney. They're going to find that they're going to need a levy soon because they're just getting attacked repeatedly of people who just want the transparency. But it's absolutely within your citizens' rights as a taxpayer here to file at the county level or at the city level a public request for records. And when they don't want to do it, it can get legal, and if you want it to get legal, you can.
Or at the state level.
I'm sorry.
No,
You go ahead and do
sorry.
your job, it's okay.
No, I was just gonna say, at the state level, I get FOIA public records requests, pretty often. I think I've gotten 2 in the last week or so.
So Ben, hang on a second, and Joseph. There are people who are gonna need to go back to work.
Yep.
Can you spend some time afterwards?
Yeah, of course, yep.
Ben, what's Idaho's position right now on ESG scores? Or is there one? Or what have you seen in your legislative up there?
So it was definitely a topic of conversation at this legislative session that ended in March. We put restrictions on using ESG scores on some things at state level, like I think having to do with and Julie Ellsworth, who's our treasurer, actually was spearheading some of that. So expanding beyond that, we haven't done much, but it was definitely a topic of conversation, and it's really important because, as we know, that's something that communist China uses to control their populace, and there's, effective way to do it. It's kind of like a credit score.
At the corporation level, because as the dictation comes down for these conglomerates that have the budgets to be able to facilitate these types of things, small companies like ours, how do we get in line with that without spending hundreds of millions of dollars that we don't have? All right, but yet it's what's being dictated to us as far as lending goes.
Yeah, the
As far
biggest.
as who you get into business with, whether or not you get into business with government, there's some really bad things that
Yeah.
come out of this ESG thing.
Definitely. Yeah, there's some, and I've heard it most often with the funding side, where if that controls who gets business loans, it controls who is able to, expand their business, start a business. It's very serious.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you, guys. Do you have any questions?
I just have one, Ben, has something probably to do with the issue we're on, but is there any more talk with the grocery tax review?
grocery tax repeal. It's definitely on the radar, and there's a few different ways to handle it. I think that what stopped it, I'll just say what I think has stopped it from happening. Well, other than, it's other than getting drawered or just stopped. I'll say the reason why I think they stop it is because there's a large amount of revenue that comes in from tourists or people who come here. So there's like this balancing act where is there more of a benefit from the revenue it brings to the state, or more of a cost to how much it impacts our citizens. So that's why I'm not advocating for or against it. I think it's crazy that we have the highest. I think we're in the top 4 highest grocery taxes in the United States, if I remember my research correctly. So I understand the issue, but one way to deal with it that could be expanded is the grocery tax credit, doing something that is actually a large enough amount that it actually covers all of the money you spent on grocery taxes. I think that's one way to deal with it, where you still have the benefit of people who are using our roads and using our services in our state, and that's one way for us to have them help shoulder the burden, if you see what I'm saying. So,
How about we just charge them 3 times the amount for a park pass?
yeah, that actually happened and Senator Okonowitz ran that bill in the House when he was representative, and I think it doubled the rates for out-of-towners, and that was the maximum that they could increase the rates for park passes. I love that legislation. I think.
I do too, because you can't go
I know.
out over here if you're not out there on Wednesday. Forget finding
Yep,
places.
I know.
And you can go 20, 30 miles into the back country.
And yet we're the ones who pay for all of it.
You have to get reservations literally like in December
Yep.
for the next summer.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just ridiculous.
So that's a serious. I think that we could keep on handling it that way.
It's not our
trying
fault your state screwed things up, but our state's so great, you want to come.
That's
You
right.
pay for that.
That's true.
We're gonna live here, better pay that. Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you having me here.